Hi, thanks, Scott. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right, well, we're delighted to have you all here, and we're going to start off with just our new information, hot off the press. We are releasing information about PPAs. So I'm going to share that, and then we will open it up to the office hours. So keep putting your questions in the chat as I share this. But we've been getting lots of questions about PPAs and are putting this out formally as of today. So the key principles that we are working with in terms of eligible PPAs within the New ERA program is that the PPA must add to your 2022 clean energy baseline. So you can't extend a PPA with the same amount of energy and if it was already a PPA in operation, but if you're adding to what that baseline was, then that would be an eligible PPA. The New ERA funds must support new clean energy use that was not already planned and underway. So those are the two guiding principles that we use to then create the general flow of eligibility. So specifically how this plays out is that a PPA executed after the date of the IRA enactment, which is August 16th, 22, from either a new or operating asset. So as long as you executed that PPA after that date, apply for New ERA funds. The PPA executed prior to the IRA, but the construction has not started prior to the date of enactment, that would also be eligible. If your PPA was signed prior to that date and construction also started prior to that date, then it would not be eligible for this program. The PPAs that you submit for this would have to be 100% clean energy. So if you currently do your PPAs mixed, you'll just have to work with developers to create just 100% clean energy contracts, and that's what would go into your proposal for New ERA. Only co-ops can apply for the New ERA program, and joint ventures must include only eligible borrowers for that program as well. So you can't have a joint venture proposal with a rural electric co-op and a private entity as equal joint ventures because the private developer would not be an eligible borrower. However, if you are contracting with them, PPAs, lots of other types of ways to partner. The infrastructure costs that are related to enabling a PPA purchase are eligible. What is ineligible are PPAs for assets that are already under construction or operational with an existing PPA, costs that are incurred prior to the obligation of the PPA exit fees, or any violations of contract terms with your G&Ts. Those are all ineligible. The implications of purchasing power versus investing and owning it on your own have no impact on your greenhouse gas score and therefore on your LOI score. So it's equally competitive in the program, regardless of if you do PPA or self-build. Next slide. Scott, if you could move, perfect, thank you. So the financing terms is up to 20 years. You could ask for a PPA using a net present value of with a 3% discount rate. The value of the PPA is something that you will estimate based on the price and quantity of the PPA over the term of the PPA. If you are using a range of values, then the minimum amount of that range is what we'll use to establish the contract. A grant can be sought through this for 25% of the PPA cost over the term of the whole PPA's life. The remaining 75% can either be covered by the applicant on your own, if you demonstrate that you have those funds, or you can seek through this program alone under the standard New ERA terms, which is either a 2% or as low as 0% if you are refinancing stranded assets. The project loans, so for those borrowers who are not existing RUS borrowers with an RUS lien, first lien, the security derived from the pledged value of an underlying asset is what will be used, and an additional credit support may be required. A system finance, those of you who are standard RUS borrowers and are already using our system finance, the security will be derived from the assets under a mortgage or indenture. So no additional support would be required. Funds will be placed into a deposit account control agreement, and those payments will be made on a recurring basis. So if you are awarded the grant, USDA will put the funds into the DACA account for the full amount of the PPA over the term of the PPA, and then on a, say, quarterly basis or whatever the terms are that are worked out in the contract, payments will come from that account to the utility for it to make its payments for the PPA. Next slide. So that's it in terms of the guidance. And now we'll just go through a couple of examples to help flesh out what this could look like. So if you have an existing wind PPA that expires in 2024, can you use New ERA funds to extend the PPA or sign a new one? You can sign a new PPA for the project if it expands the use of clean energy and the existing PPA definitively ends. So you can't renew or extend in that way. But if it is ending and there's a clear definitive point, and then you're starting a new one with an existing asset, that is okay, provided that the application meets other requirements of the funding notice, such as creating consumer benefits. If you signed a PPA in 2019 for a solar and battery storage project, but construction has not yet commenced, would that be eligible? So the answer is yes, because the construction has not started. So we heard from you, the stakeholders, and from the field that there are a lot of times PPAs that don't end up following through. And so as long as the construction has not commenced, that would be adding to your baseline and therefore eligible. If you want to partner with a developer through a joint venture whereby they will develop a wind plant and will be the sole off-taker of that power. So if the joint venture is not another eligible RUS borrower as defined under the New ERA terms, then the joint venture is not eligible for this project. If, going to the next question, example, I want to purchase wind energy from an existing wind asset. I do not currently have a PPA with the wind asset developer. The asset is already operational and I would like to purchase power from it. So yes, that would be eligible because it is increasing your baseline of your clean energy. The agreement will need to be executed after the date of the IRA enactment. And lastly, I want to purchase a new wind energy via PPA from an asset that is expected to be completed in 2023. I will be the sole off-taker, but I will not own any of the project. I will just purchase the power. And Scott, I'm having difficulty seeing that very bottom. So if you wouldn't mind.
I'm happy to jump in.
Great. Awesome.
And basically, you're on the final one. I want to purchase a wind energy via PPA.
Yes.
And so, yes, it doesn't matter when the asset is completed or when it began. The main thing is that it's a new PPA executed after August 16th, 2022, which is the IRA enactment date.
So that's for purchase, again, examples, purchase wind via PPA, where it is expected to be completed by 2023. They'll be the sole off-taker, but will not own any of the project, and it'll be just purchasing power. So the answer to that is that's okay.
And Elisa, do you want Chris to do the next slide?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Well, greetings everybody. Yeah. This is Chris McLean and Larry Swarovski. We're live from Wichita, Kansas today. We'll be meeting with co-ops and municipalities and other rural providers after this office hours, and we are so delighted today to be able to share with you all this new information. Thank you, Elisa, for excellent exposition on our PPA approach, and you'll see some similarity in what we want to describe here next, which is our approach to financing or refinancing stranded assets. What we have here is basically a spreadsheet, and we can make the spreadsheet available to you as an estimating tool on how to calculate stranded assets. We're just using a very simple base case here. A stranded asset where there is stranded investment, meaning that there's outstanding debt. Here our base case, we just showed $1 million of stranded asset value that has 15 years remaining on the loan term and carries an interest rate of 5%. So those would be, you would just fill those in to be, reflect what your particular circumstance are. We do apply a 3% discount rate to determine a net present value of your stream of payments related to that stranded asset and the loan term that is remaining on your indebtedness related to the stranded asset. Again, in the calculator here, you can put in whether it's monthly, quarterly, or annual payments. And do a calculation of the number of loan payments, give you the loan period, and it'll generate the total value of the stranded asset with the net present value attached to it. We'll then compare that to the net present value of 0% financing for that same loan term. And that will give you a difference. The net present value of the stranded asset minus the net present value of that stranded asset at 0%. And add $1 to that, and that becomes the amount of stranded, amount of your commitment. If you refinance your stranded asset with us at 0%, you have to accept a commitment to invest at least that much money into new, clean, renewable energy. So that's where the 500,657,848, which is like $1 more than your difference between the NPV of the stranded asset and the NPV of the 0%. Now, that amount of new clean energy investment is also eligible for 25% clean energy, up to 25% grant support, and the remaining 75%, depending on whether you're project or system finance, up to 75% could be available to finance at the 0% or 2% range. As Elisa explained in the context of power purchase agreements, all of this is subject, of course, to your ability to repay. For project financing, we would be looking at your ability of the project to be able to manage that refinancing, but for system finance, we would look to the assets of the entire system. So here's how we're able to refinance your stranded asset, extend a 0% interest rate, and then in exchange for that, you would make a commitment to invest your savings into new clean energy. And that new investment also is eligible for the up to 25% grant support and then 75% loan support. So there we go. That's the mathematics of stranded asset refinancing. If you are an existing RUS borrower and there would be related, let's say FFB, Federal Financing Bank, prepayment premiums, we would just include that into the stranded asset costs and include that into the refinancing. And then we would also make any adjustments in the budget authority consumed related to any modification costs that would be associated with the notes that are being refinanced.
Thank you, Chris. And hopefully that makes sense to folks, and we will put this up on the website, both the PPA slides and then this stranded asset calculator, so you all can see what that would look like for you. And then, you know, of course, welcome questions on this as well. But I think that that's all we are going to do for slides today. I think most folks have heard our presentation, and this is really meant to be office hours for people to come and ask questions. We do have one in-person participant who will turn to for their Q&A, eventually their question. But we'll just open it up to folks and kind of get started, and would really welcome folks to come on screen if they want, and actually kind of engage a little bit more. That's the hope for these office hours. So I think first we'll go to Jake Cornack, who has asked, and Jake, if you want to come on screen, you can.
Claire, we do have a couple of raised hands too. So.
Oh, great. Let me look at raised hands.
Well, let's get Jake's
question, and then we'll go to the raised hands.
Raised hands. That's good.
So Pace, can you please provide clarity on the location of a solar system in relation to an energy community? specifically, some cooperatives have service territories in energy communities, but does the actual solar system need to physically be in those communities, or can it just provide service to those communities? So answer here is that it just has to provide service to those communities, at least if you're looking at the PACE 40% loan for or partial loan forgiveness, then it has to serve at least 50% energy communities or distressed communities and disadvantaged communities. So it has to serve those communities. It doesn't have to physically be in those communities, unless of course those communities want the plant to be there and the asset to be there, and you all should work that out with them. But the idea is really to make sure that those communities get lower cost energy. And so it's up to 50% of the service area, at least 50% of the service area that you're serving is serving energy communities. So you'd look at that, you'd look at your service area and the population there and see how much you're serving. And you can combine, if you've got some energy communities and some distressed communities and the project, a single project is serving both of those communities, then those can add up together to the 50% plus as well.
Subtracting out any double counting between the two.
Yes.
All right, well, let's go to see if we have any hands up.
Hands raised.
And we do. We're going to start off with Gregory. Greg, you can now unmute yourself, sir, and talk to our team.
Y'all answered my question directly after I asked it in the slide deck. I was
Oh, you were clairvoyant, Greg. Thank you.
right. I was just asking if the PPA, if like the cost of the infrastructure that the PPA is sold off of, if you could recoup that cost. And y'all, if I understood correctly, the answer is yes.
Yep. Answer is yes.
Thank you.
We love it when we can say yes. Okay, thank you, Gregory. And
Thank you.
do want to move on to, sorry. Scott,
Nope.
you're our MC, you go for it.
No problem. I'm just unmuting folks. So we're gonna go with Zachary, and then Jamie, you're next. Okay. So Zachary, go ahead and unmute yourself, sir, and talk to our team.
Great, thank you. First of all, appreciate that you guys have been so accessible. I actually asked these questions on one of your first webinars, and you kind of added something to the FAQ, but it still doesn't quite get there.
Well, we have to kind of genericize some of them.
Yes.
So we apologize if we lost the
No problem.
translation, but have at us here.
Yeah, if it's all right with you, it might be helpful for me to be a little bit more specific about
Sure.
my actual circumstance. So I work for a renewable energy developer that has a portfolio of projects under development in New York State. And these projects will be injecting into the bulk electric system, which is run by the New York ISO, which is a regional transmission organization. And you did recently add an FAQ that kind of touches upon this, but when asked how you determine the eligibility, the answer is that the rural determination is based on the service territory of the off-takers. But with injecting into the bulk power system, you can't track electrons that way. So, I mean, I think by definition, the off-takers would technically be all 19.5 million people living in New York State. But these projects themselves are physically located within areas that fall under the rural definition. So just trying to see whether or not these projects would actually be eligible.
So here is where I think, have to say no. We can't, under this program, allow for, we would kind of consider this merchant power, because we do need to be able to know who is benefiting from the project. And for these programs, we need to make sure that at least 50% of rural communities are benefiting from them. We need to be able to say kind of, see what the ratepayer impact is and things like that. So unfortunately, I don't think that these projects would qualify unless it's really clear.
As we understand, right, as you describe them and as we understand them,
Okay.
you can establish the beneficiary contractually. That's the point of the PPA, is to say, regardless of where the electrons go, and regardless of where the electrons come from, the PPA defines who is benefiting from that power. Now, Yeah, and so we've made it clear in the funding notice that we would not be able to support merchant power, which is again, just producing power and putting it onto the grid, which Zach sounds like exactly what you were proposing.
Yeah, and I mean, I kind of felt like the answer was going to be no, but it seemed like there was maybe a pathway, and the
Yeah,
way,
there's no harm in asking. I mean,
yeah,
you know, if and if New York State allows you to have power purchase agreements,
well,
more power that you put on the grid, well, that might be something different. But
so these
what you
projects
described
are, they've been awarded under the NYSERDA run REC program, which I don't know if you're familiar with that program or not.
right.
You are?
A little bit.
Okay. So I mean, that would be the financial guarantee, but again, that is statewide. So I think that gets us back to the same place, I guess.
And I think any calculation you do of New York State's population.
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
even come close, so.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you, Zach.
All right, Jamie, you can now unmute yourself, and then Aiden, you're next.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
clear.
We would love
Okay.
to see you too, if you want to put your screen on.
Oh, that I do not know how to do in Zoom.
It's all good, don't worry about it.
Okay, I apologize. I actually have 3 questions and I'm happy to only ask one at a time so that I don't monopolize the questions. So let me know if I'm taking up too much time. But the first is, we're located in Alaska and we're a developer in EPC and working with a utility that's a RUS borrower on a PPA. So we're pretty sure that our project fits really well into what you're looking to fund for the PACE program. But we wanted to clarify in the category 3 funding or loan forgiveness. Our service area is 100%, let's see, yeah, so we're 100% of a tribal area according to your USDA maps of disadvantaged communities of Alaska Native Village statistical areas, but we wanted to confirm if that's the tool that you'll be using to determine tribal areas.
So I'm not 100% certain if that exact tool is what we'll be using, but if your service territory is 100% tribal, you're serving 100% tribal?
No, the service area is a variety of customers, but the service territory includes Native villages, and your map shows that all of the service territory is disadvantaged community Alaska Native Village statistical areas. So we weren't quite sure what tool you'll be using to determine tribal area, and wanted to understand that so that we could appropriately map what percentage is tribal area.
So this is one where we might have to follow up, and maybe you could send us a specific email.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and maybe you have someone who can work with you on the map.
Okay.
Because I'm afraid I don't want to make a commitment and then look at the details and say, well, not exactly.
Okay.
But there are we do acknowledge there are large areas of Alaska that will benefit from the 60% category. But we would need to be able to see, I think, with more detail how close you are.
And then of course, in that category C, if the project is tribally owned, so meaning if at least 51% of the project were owned by the tribe, then it would absolutely be eligible for the 60%.
Okay.
So but just note that as well. It could be a joint venture as long as at least if it's majority owned by the tribe.
Okay, I've actually submitted this question before, and I got a reply that it would be in the FAQs, but it hasn't been. So I'm not.
Can you submit it again to, I think, Tasha, if you could put your email in the chat, if you could submit it, but with not just the general details of like, if you could submit it with some more details about the exact service area, I think that would help us.
Okay.
Because we have put out FAQs about kind of general service area requirements and things like that, but it sounds like you're specifically talking about a specific mapping tool. So if you could just put that in the email and what area you're talking about, that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. And my next question has to do with the Buy American requirements for for-profit entities.
Sure.
What will be your waiver or exception criteria? Specifically looking to understand if a domestically available manufactured good are substantially less energy efficient than foreign goods, such as solar panels, could the subrecipient seek a non-availability waiver based on the substandard quality of US made goods?
Well, let me go through the Buy America, because you open up a nice area of discussion on Buy America. And there are two flavors of Buy America we've discussed in previous webinars. There's the Buy America, Build America Act, which is the most recent, which applies to tribal utilities, municipal utilities, and kind of charitable nonprofits. And then there is what we like to call the Buy America Classic provisions, the Buy America rules that have been in existence since the 40s, 50s at the Rural Utility Service, and before that, Rural Electrification Administration, which applies to everybody, including for-profit entities and cooperatives. The difference is if you're for-profit or a cooperative, you get Buy America Classic. If you're municipal, tribal, or charitable nonprofit, you get the Buy America, Build America Act. They're very similar in many ways. There are some key differences. Buy America Classic has a 6% price differential in its determination, whereas BABA has a 25% price differential. Buy America Classic has more direct authority vested in the administrator, where BABA does require exceptions, waivers to be posted and subject to public comment, commented upon by the Office of Management Budget before it can be subject to a decision by the administrator. Buy America eligible countries are respected in both cases by the USDA. So to the extent we have trade agreements with countries like Canada, Mexico, Israel, many Western European countries, many democratic, the democracies in the Pacific, like Japan and Korea, many of those countries are eligible for many products as Buy America eligible, so they get Buy America eligible treatment. It is possible to do waivers in both. The BABA waiver takes a little bit longer. The RUS waiver could take a little bit quicker. You still have to make the case as to why the waiver should be granted. It's not automatic, and we will look at the totality of information submitted with the waiver request, and we will do it on an ad hoc basis, not on a categorical basis.
And so, Jamie, just to make sure we're answering your question is for-profit entities under PACE, what BABA applies and what ability is there to apply for waivers and how likely?
Yeah, but for PACE, and again, for a for-profit entity, BABA would not apply, but Buy America Classic would. So here's the bottom line. Anybody who is applying for funding for RUS to construct infrastructure, as we made a distinction between power purchase agreements in the early part of the presentation, you're going to be covered by one flavor or the other of Buy America. It's just that the waiver process might be a little more expeditious in what we would get the Buy America Classic, but nobody gets out from doing Buy America or seeking a waiver under the Buy America rules if they need to go to non-domestic sources or non-Buy America eligible country sources.
And to seek a waiver, you would just apply for that waiver.
Correct. There's a procedure, and it's explained well on our website, but yes, there's a procedure to submit a request for waiver.
Jamie, does that cover your question?
Yeah, it definitely does. Yep, we definitely will look into your procedure for submitting that request. And I guess I assume that we don't need to flag that in the LOI stage. We would just wait until the application stage. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would think that if your assumption depends on you getting the waiver, it would be helpful to know, because that helps us judge the financial feasibility. We wouldn't prejudge the waiver request per se, but know, if that was determinative, that could affect, your
Yeah.
financial feasibility.
So I would note it in the LOI.
Okay, that's a good, point. Thank you for clarifying. And then my third question was, we wouldn't be required to do a NEPA analysis, and we think we're in the EA category of the NEPA results based on the project size, unless we got this grant or loan. And so we're working with a environmental consulting firm to just understand the cost and time implications of that. And they've asked for some clarification around what the EA documentation would be seeking, so that they can properly give us a time and cost estimate. They said they came across many different bulletins when looking into the USDA NEPA guidance.
Right, and remember, categorical exclusions are also themselves not automatic, and determining that a project is eligible for a categorical exclusion is itself part of the environmental review process. It's very fact specific, and we will be encouraging engagement with our environmental team, for those that are be invited to submit their applications if you haven't already engaged with the environmental team to make some of those determinations.
So Jamie, I think if there's like a more specific question about timing, if you can, I don't think that we would be able to provide you clarity on how long it would take or anything unless we had more information on the project.
Okay, do you have a list of documentation that would be required in a NEPA environmental assessment for the PACE loan program?
Well, the answer is yes and no, but I think this is one where we would want to be able to understand what your parameters are.
Yes, send an email to Tasha about this one too, and then maybe we can post a Q&A on, we can try to post a Q&A on what documentation would be needed, or at least answer your direct question.
And while we're talking about environmental review, it's important to point out that we need to be able to comply with 3 important statutes. NEPA is just one of them. That's the National Environmental Policy Act, which, again, the name implies, measures the environmental impact of any federal action that would have effect with this, disturbing the ground or commencing construction. But we also have to worry about the Endangered Species Act, and we have to worry about Section 106 of the Historic Preservation Act. And often it's Section 106 that tends to bog down projects. So you may get a CADX from NEPA, but you also would need a no likelihood to disturb cultural resources. So just want to be very careful that NEPA is not the only issue that we have to consider in the environmental review process. So it's, again, very fact specific. We'll have to look at that on an individual basis.
But we are staffing up on the environmental review side and hope to make that a smooth process for folks.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys' time.
Thank you, Jamie. Good questions.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, moving along. We have Aaron, and then Madeline, you're next, and then Jake, you're after that. Oh, I'm sorry. Aiden's next, and then Aaron, you're after that. You may unmute yourself, sir.
Right, Aiden.
Hi, thank you guys for hosting this today. This is really helpful. 2 questions. The first one was sort of touched on before, but I just wanted to clarify. In order to qualify for the 40% loan forgiveness, if the project is located within an energy community or a disadvantaged community, does the project also need to serve 50% disadvantaged or energy community residents?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So
who are the beneficiaries of the project? In other words, you think about the disadvantaged communities or energy communities that these projects with their incentives those benefits will flow through to those consumers. So that's what we're focusing on, is who are the customer benefits, the population that benefits from the project.
Got it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and of course, if it's in an energy community and that's well managed and the community is excited about the project, and it's creating jobs, that's also wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, understood. And then the other question that we had is if two different applicants would be able to apply the same project for PACE and then also under the new ERA program. So for example, if the off-taker is a tribal nation or a rural electric co-op, but the owner of the project is a renewable energy developer, would they both be able to apply for the different programs?
Okay, very good question. We made clear in the funding notice that we will not double pay. So
Mhm.
if a project gets support from PACE, the PPA, which buys the power, will not be eligible for
New
New
ERA.
ERA. If New ERA is going to provide financing for the PPA, as we just explained Lisa just explained at the top of the show, top of the meeting here. So we're already talking about the Claire and Chris show, right? Claire, Chris, and Lisa show. But anyway, if you get New ERA support for the power purchase agreement, well, then you won't be eligible for PACE support to build the construction, because that would be like us paying for the same thing twice.
Mhm.
Now, you can submit a PACE application and a New ERA application for separate distinct projects, right? We don't want people to submit the same project into both, hoping that one of them is going to survive, because you could end up having both of them being canceled. You have to pick,
Choose your horse.
choose your horse and ride it. You can have different horses enter each one of the programs, but they do have to be different and distinct.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, Aiden.
Aaron, you go ahead and talk to our panelists. Madeline, you're coming up next.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
Loud
Yeah.
and clear.
Great. Thank you for doing this office hour. Greatly appreciate it. So I'm with American Municipal Power and we're a 501c12. We're considered a co-op under the statute, but we have 132 municipal electric systems that are members of ours. And we are interested in doing a solar power purchase agreement and utilizing the New ERA and possibly the PACE. We have not received a loan from you before. So we believe that that still qualifies us under the predominantly rural area prong. But 3 of our members have populations over 50,000. But 129 of our members are smaller communities that are considered rural under your definition. So we weren't sure if we would qualify on the whole.
So, yeah, Aaron, when you do the math, right, take those 3 that are non-rural, add the population up and compare it to the population of your rural members. And then that's how we would determine whether it's predominantly rural. You have to be 50% plus 1
Okay.
for PACE. Right, because you haven't, well, for PACE you have to have a 50-50 rural non-rural, but in the ERA, if you've not had a loan with RUS, you're a rural electric cooperative, you have to serve a predominantly rural area. The predominantly rural area would be, again, same 50-50 test.
Aaron, are you guys, sorry, did you say that you are legally a rural electric cooperative by the IRS?
Yeah, we're a 501c12.
Okay,
Yeah, that
then
would be
you
eligible.
automatically are eligible under the
Well,
new ERA program.
No, because they've never borrowed from RUS. So they're eligible as a cooperative. The
Mhm.
question is whether they meet the predominantly
Predominantly
rural
rural.
test
Okay.
or for New ERA. And I think, again, it's a mathematical question that you'd have to be able to answer
So
Yeah, and
predominantly, so when you say predominantly, you mean over 50%. And that's for the population, not meter count, right? 50% population.
either actually. So new era, if you look at the language, then it allows you to determine that either based on population. So, you know, rural population over total population or by meter.
Okay, okay, that's helpful.
In fact, if I could ask one of our colleagues at RUS, if you can find that section from the funding notice and maybe put that in the chat.
Yeah, maybe
I think
Lisa,
that
if
would
you could
be helpful.
find that area that says both the population and the meter are two ways to calculate it.
Okay, I'll take care of that. This is Ken. Okay,
Oh, thank you, Ken.
yep.
Thank you. Yeah, because like the city of Columbus, for example, was one of our members. Their population is, 800 and some thousand, but they only have a 17,000 electric customers. So,
So you can choose.
Well, right,
yeah.
so it's again, yeah, your service is your customers and your.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it should be clear in that language that Ken posts the two different ways you can calculate it.
okay, perfect. Thank you. I greatly appreciate that.
Thanks, Erin.
right, who's up next?
Yep, sorry about that. Finding the mute button. Madeline, you may come off mute, and then Jake, you're next.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes,
I'm clear, Madeline, sounded good.
Great. I put my video on, but I don't think we're able to. Seem to be something that we can do. Two sort of buckets of questions. The first is, Chris, you've mentioned a number of times in some of the Q&As, your prior webinars, that you can aggregate projects under a single LOI and then disaggregate them at the application stage. My first question about that is, if you're aggregating projects under a single LOI, are they all scored individually or are they scored as a group? And then furthermore, when you disaggregate them, I assume that means that they can all get their own loan agreements. And I'm talking about PACE for this. So when you disaggregate them, you're applying as separate legal entities for their own individual loan agreements. Do I have that right, first of all?
I think so. Let me try to explain.
Okay.
Kind of the three basic options in a consolidated multiple applicant single LOI. One would, let's just use a real simple example. I've got let's say three smaller entities that are wanting to team up, and each one of them has a project. They want to be able to kind of share the costs of this whole application process. They each have a separate project, bundle them together in a single LOI. One of the three is the lead. They'll be the one that'll be authorized as the point of contact. They'll be the one that'll file the LOI and file all the data on behalf of the team of three. We'll look at that. Let's say it passes that first LOI hurdle and is in money and gets an invitation to apply. In that case, we would, assuming that the three applicants want to maintain the separate identity of those three projects, we would then have that single application become, or single LOI turn into three separate applications. The lead would keep their identification, but they would only be responsible for their project. The two other partners would have their projects described in the invitations to apply, as well as their loan applications, and they'd have to carry through the application stage. So that's where you have a single LOI spanning three separate applications for three separate projects that are separately identified with each one of the partners. Another option might be a single asset where you'd have three co-owners going in under a single LOI. So each one of them owning 33 1/3% of the whole. And they would go in with a single LOI. Here again, they would split off into three separate LOIs, with each one of them being responsible for their 33 1/3% ownership of the single asset. They would each have applications to go forward. We'd have to look at the bundle there to make sure that the three are not completely they're not dependent on each other so that they can stand alone, but just kind of like as a base case, you have a single asset. It's not unusual for utilities to have percentage ownerships of single assets. So we could have something like that. The third option, which frankly we think is unlikely, but we don't know, it might be a popular option, is where single LOI and the three partners, they want to be jointly and severally liable for the success of the entire project. And if one of them falls out, the other one is fully responsible, and vice versa. That they, it's kind of like being married, right? They're responsible for the entire whole. So that they stay together, they come in a single LOI. It's one whole. All three of them are 100% responsible for the success of the project, and that stays as a single invitation to apply and a single application going through, but with contractual responsibilities among all three of them. So they're countersigning for each other's loans. So those are the kind of the three examples of how it would likely.
Okay. Let me give you another example. Thanks for those.
Okay.
A scenario. So you said, multiple projects can go under a single LOI. What about multiple? So the LOI is submitted by a single entity. That single entity is submitting multiple projects. But then later on, for financing purposes, you want to break out those projects into their own project level entities. Is that doable?
Yeah. No, I think that's pretty close to what the first example was.
It's just a matter of timing, I think. You're only having you have one single entity to file the LOI for multiple projects, and then later on, all those projects get their own entity, and that's okay.
Oh, yeah, that would be okay. And certainly, the reason we proposed joint LOIs in both PACE and New ERA, in that the joint LOI can get the team its place in the queue in PACE, and a joint LOI presumably can bundle up a lot of activity into a stronger score in the competition in New ERA. And one of the most compelling arguments to us in accepting the idea actually came from Beneficial Electrification League, was that we understood that there were a number of small entities that maybe on their own wouldn't have the bandwidth to prepare an application, but if they could pool their resources together into groups of applicants, even though they're distinct projects, that would provide efficiency to enter into this process. But at the same time, we didn't want to hold people responsible for things that are beyond their control. So that's why we offered this option of splitting apart, again, having a single LOI spawning multiple invitations to apply and multiple loan and grant or loan forgiveness agreements, depending on which program you're in.
Okay, very good. Yep, that answers my question. Thank you. And if you don't mind, I've got one more.
Go ahead. Sure.
So again, in other FAQs, you've confirmed, and in the written FAQ too, you've confirmed that commercial, industrial customers of an applicant may be an off-taker. And again, this question is oriented around PACE. So in this scenario where an eligible entity applies, receives a loan agreement, the off-taker is an industrial customer. That industrial customer is located in a rural area, so it qualifies that way. Does the industrial customer then become the quote unquote ratepayer to whom the benefits must flow under PACE? Or is there sort of a separate requirement that that project should also benefit sort of some broader subset of ratepayers or community members in that rural area? Do you see what I'm asking?
So I think because they're the only ratepayer, the benefits would have to flow to them. I would
Mhm.
flag and welcome anything there additional from Chris, but I would also flag that under PACE, everyone does have to have a community benefit plan that's
Mhm.
outside of the project and is reflective of working with the community where the project is. And so there we want to see you making sure that you have a great community benefit plan, that you're working with the local community, and that they are also benefiting from the project in some way.
Yeah, a single, again, and so this, the key to your question was may. And, you know, your hypothetical is about a single off-taker, which does pose some issues that, again, would need to be well addressed in a community benefit plan. I think you want to be careful not to kind of mix up the concept of a single off-taker versus a power purchase agreement with a non-utility entity. We have said that we would entertain PPAs, power purchase agreements with non-utility entities. Again, that helps us determine whether you're a rural beneficiary. But there are lots of issues, including underwriting issues related to having a project dependent on one single off-taker in one single location. And you have to be able to determine whether that off-taker itself is creditworthy or is a good counterparty. Underlying business is something that is strong and enduring. And we use the term in our webinars here as a bankable PPA. So, you know, and I use this example sometimes, you know, if your off-taker is a hedge fund that's mining cryptocurrency, I'm not so sure that that's going to be as strong as a PPA with a Fortune 500 company that has rural service presence and they're buying power for their rural locations, right? So I think that's just be aware that that could be an issue.
Yeah. Okay. So just to rephrase what you just said, a single off-taker PPA, and maybe I'll add in behind the meter, may be eligible for PACE as long as the off-taker is a bankable, creditworthy entity.
And the off-taker is rural.
And the off-taker is rural. Yep. Okay.
But now, a simpler case, an easier case to discuss is I've got a large corporate off-taker in my service territory, and this project will be serving the utility, which includes the off-taker. Well, then you've got the whole community to look at as well as the that off-taker.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thing to remember on all of these, PACE and in New Era, PACE, obviously, you know, we will be considering projects on a rolling basis, but we will also be considering projects on eligibility, which you have to be eligible because we can't obligate funds unless it's for an eligible purpose. It has to be financially and technologically feasible. And we are very rigorous in our underwriting, and it has to be securable.
Chris, can you expand on that to go to the first question in the chat box under PACE? Based on the loan size requested, how do you determine the creditworthiness of the grantor at the LOI phase? Is it based on balance sheet, net asset value, or any other financial metrics?
All of the above. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that will be one of our first tests. And that's why we do ask for financial information. And you know, the 5 C's of credit, we look at that. What's the collateral? What's the condition?
Yeah. So
What's the character of the applicant? So we look again, the full, the ability to repay the loans. You know, even though we have a partial debt forgiveness and we have a grant component in New ERA, these are still at their core loans that have to be repaid. And these are full recourse loans. Be repaid and they have to be secured. And we're going to be applying kind of the same kind of rigor that we apply to our core program. And there'll be a bonus at the end for those who are able to deliver on the promises made in the LOI and application stage. And that bonus would be the debt forgiveness or the grant.
Thank you. Do you have any more hands raised, or do you want me to read through the chat?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of hands raised. Scott, are you still with us? Jake, it looks like
Yep.
Jake is maybe up next.
Yep, Jake, you can unmute yourself, sir. Eric and Samantha, you two are up next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you to both of you for being so accessible throughout this process. I have like a couple logistic questions and one more substantial one. One is just, so, you know, it's rolling applications, the window is going to open, and I'm curious, given the high interest in this program, is USDA going to be looking at like the level of timestamp, like between seconds? You know, I that's like one concern that's
We absolutely will, Jake. We have many conversations about how many milliseconds. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I mean, yeah. That is relevant. We're working on that as we speak. And in pace, we will line them up first to last and go through them and process them as they arrive, but also as they are ready.
Yeah, so it won't be for pace, it won't be necessarily first come, first out. But if you know, when you submit, you're basically kind of reserving your spot in the funding line. And then it might take, you know, it will take folks different times to work through the full process. But that will be your reservation time, and it will be time stamped down to the millisecond.
The New ERA is a competition on the greatest reductions of gases. Why we always encourage everyone to be ambitious, but be realistic. You have to be able to execute your projects within the time frame.
Got it. Yeah, that's super helpful, and I'm going to be practicing my clicking speed. But just another couple questions. One, you were touching on it a bit earlier with the 5 C's, but especially if you're creating a separate legal entity, can you expand on specifically what would be considered acceptable or sufficient to provide kind of the info that's necessary to evaluate our financial strength? So,
well, you'll have to be able to show us how. Let's say if you are a new entity, is there someone else that will be backing you up to be able to ensure that the asset that the loan is repaid? We do need collateral, pledges of assets, pledges of credit, pledges that you take letters of credit. Excuse me, irrevocable letters of credit. You could have parent guarantees, or you could have third-party guarantees. But if you're a brand new entity, you'll have to work with us to be able to convince us that you have sufficient collateral to be able to back the loan.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just really quick, given the rigors of sam.gov, I want to be clear on the entity administrator notarized letter. So some of us are unclear about whether we need that letter in hand, or we're already like considered the entity administrator, but curious if we need to like go out and get that letter in addition. We've run into a couple hiccups there.
Let me answer it this way. We just encourage everybody to go get your SAM registration, get your eAuth registration, make sure it's clear and current.
Yeah, I'm just pulling up the SAM.gov language for current, let's see. make
the
sure
time
we're.
of application, so.
Mhm. Yeah, so I'm not sure, I'm not actually, so this is the link, I'll just post this in the chat.
So what is it that you
Yeah,
don't have?
you're
from
talking
SAM?
about a letter?
You have a SAM registration, but you don't have the letter?
We have a SAM registration, and then it's an active registration, and then only a current entity administrator can assign the administrator role. And you must submit an entity administrator appointment letter to the Federal Service Desk if you need to appoint a new entity. We don't need to appoint a new entity, but it sounded, we were getting some error messages when we were trying to get the letter.
Okay, well, we will be doing some additional webinars on the LOI submission process. And again, my advice is wherever you are in the SAM process, just keep working it. And if you don't have a SAM registration, start getting it. Same thing for e-authorization. You're going to need them.
Yeah, but for PACE, you'll just need, whoever is the main POC applicant, they'll be the ones, obviously if it becomes disaggregated, if we do applications or contracts with each entity, every one of them will need a SAM.gov. But for the initial letter of interest, I believe you can submit, the main POC is who would have to have the SAM.gov registration.
And we are frankly working on the technology of submission as we speak, and what keys are needed to open that door. We will have to we'll have to reserve that for a later webinar.
Got it. Thank you very much for your time.
But no, excellent.
Thanks, Jake.
But out of your question, everyone should, if you don't have SAM, get it. If you have SAM, make sure it's current, and get as much of SAM out of the way as you can as early as you can.
And same for e-authorization.
Same thing for e-auth.
Yeah. Okay, I think we can move on to some, looks like Eric disappeared. Oh, no, there he is. Eric.
Hi, thanks for doing this. It's great.
Oh,
Quick
happy to do it.
question, maybe sort of a follow-up to one earlier about the rural assignment. Could my organization build a PPA that just picked out rural folks to benefit from, even if they're larger organizations, or my larger organization was probably not considered rural?
Yeah, it's all about who are you serving? So we want to make sure that the program is serving at least 50% rural, to make sure that the rural populations are benefiting from this program and benefiting from those cost reductions. So it's about who you're serving.
Okay, great, thank you.
You can establish that contractually through your PPA as to who is buying this power, kind of regardless of where the physical electrons go. We know that power is sold in a different way than power moves.
So I think we've got Samantha up next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Samantha.
Hi, guys. This is Samantha with Arkansas Electric. Thank you so much for the information on the stranded assets. That's been a big question of ours. I still need a little bit more information on how the stranded asset value, like in your example, how was that determined? Is that basically just the remaining loan value that's outstanding, or is that net book
In
value?
simple terms, and we can go back to maybe that slide, but in simple terms, yes. So if you have a asset that has debt attached to it,
okay,
that's your stranded asset value.
Let me just see if I can share my screen for that slide again, or if Tasha, you can pull it up.
Maybe we better let Tasha pull it up.
Yeah.
We may share
on the screen. Yeah.
Right. So in our case, we have 2 coal plants that will be retiring in 2028 and 2030, and we will have remaining debt associated. So we'll just take that value and start there. At what point in time do we take that value, I guess?
So,
At what
right, so there's two scenarios. One is if you have a stranded asset that, so for a pre-existing closure, and you're still paying debt on that closed facility, we'll help you out with the refinancing, and then you take on the obligation to deploy renewables. For a stranded asset that is to be created, right? We could, future stranded assets can be refinanced according to the date that the utility takes the affirmative steps towards the retirement. Okay? So you're cutting it kind of close on that 2030 date. It's like when you take those definitive alternative steps, then we can start doing the calculation on the stranded asset. When this stranded asset is becomes stranded, right? So we can start working on it, but we have to only start when it's actually stranded, meaning that you've turned it off, it's no longer producing, and you still have debt associated with that. And then we go through the net present value calculation, and you still will have to be able to deliver that renewable investment by the deadline of the program, right? Which is the last day of the fiscal year 2031. So you'll have to work that into your game plan. So does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And just to make sure we're clear on our end, so we are for those assets, we are accelerating depreciation. So by the time those are closed down or closed out, we will have like a very low net book value or zero net book value. But is it still considered a stranded asset when we have debt costs that will be remaining at that time?
You have debt, right? And you're an RUS borrower in your example.
Yes,
right?
we are. Yes.
So we can associate the stranded asset with the notes that you took out to finance that asset.
Okay.
Right? So that makes it a little easier calculation on our part, I think. But yes, we're refinancing the debt associated with the stranded asset.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's very helpful.
Folks, right, I mean, folks will be retiring the plants, they'll still owe debt on it. And then we'll try to help you out as long as we can get it into that time frame that we have available.
Right.
Dan,
okay, thank you.
Thank
you.
you. Yeah,
Good question.
And hopefully that will go online soon as an Excel spreadsheet that you can play with.
Perfect.
Dan, you may unmute yourself, sir.
Hey, can you hear me all right?
Yes, Dan, go ahead.
Good. Well, good to be on the Claire and Chris show. Been a big fan for months now. So this question is of I put it in the kind of tactical submission logistics category for an LOI submitter that has multiple projects and therefore will have multiple technical description, 1,500 word or less write-ups for each. Can all of those be combined into one PDF and that PDF uploaded in the portal? Or will there be kind of like different project objects created in the portal where you're clicking drop downs and entering information manually kind of for each one? Is there any, as we work to get our submission materials pulled together, any kind of guidance you can prepare on format would be helpful?
Yes. We are not at the point where we can give you that guidance. We'll be meeting later today, in fact, to be able to discuss that exact issue. I will say though, we intended the LOI to be a manageable lift. We need sufficient information to be able to tell us what you want to do, where you want to do, how much it's going to cost. And we did publish the template of the type of information that we would like to see. And we know that there is opportunities in even in the template, to be able to have some additional attachments, but, the full application, that's gonna be the big lift. That you're gonna have to give us everything we need to be able to make a lending decision.
Got it.
Yeah, we will be, again, I would love to be able to answer your question, but we are working on that exact issue, and should have an answer shortly.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. We'll stay tuned. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, next.
Sarah Garman.
Hi, this is Sarah Garman from Avangrid. Thanks so much for the session today. A few questions that I don't think have been answered yet. I put one in the chat that was on loan forgiveness. Presumably, is it safe to assume there might be some applications that are awarded that get zero loan forgiveness? And is the time you find that out basically when you're selected for award?
Oh. So, again, we have three categories, up to 20, up to 40, up to 60%. And if you get an invitation to proceed, we will tell you what we are inviting you to proceed to. And then you do get the forgiveness at the end once you deliver the project and it's validated and performing as promised. And then you'll get the funds released on a project basis for both the loan and for the forgiveness. On a system basis, you have the potential, if financially feasible, to draw during construction and just get the forgiveness released at the end of the process. The risk, of course, is if your project doesn't perform well, you're not going to necessarily get the full amount. But you will know what you're applying for if you have passed the first hurdle of the LOI.
Yeah, when we welcome you to do an application, we'll be clear about how much loan forgiveness we're.
And on the topic of LOIs too, we do in the NOFO notice of funding opportunity. We do reserve the right to ask for additional information. So, we may look at your LOI and say, we need a little more data from you, or we need a little more precise description of your service area to be able to, fully evaluate your LOI. So everyone's on notice that there may be, further inquiries relating to the LOIs.
All right, no, that's super helpful. A couple of other quick questions. We noticed that there's, understandably looking for collateral for the lease possibly and information, about different rates for the PPA. And just curious, I assume you're going to have to submit a lot of documentation, the full application to document, if you have a lease for the land or, what kind of PPA you're setting up. But will USDA be talking directly with those parties, or will all communication be through the applicant, presumably?
So, we will need proof. In the LOI stage, you don't really necessarily have to have control of the site, but you have to be able to demonstrate to us that you can get control of the site within the appropriate amount of time.
But Sarah, what I think you're asking, are you asking if we would reach out to other parties outside of the applicant to verify information?
Yeah, so basically, we're negotiating a lease, and we're considering this program. I think there's going to have to be some conversation with the leaseholder to explain what this program is, et cetera, why we're providing their information to USDA. But to your point, would you then follow, if you have questions, you would come to us first and not to.
Oh, I think, right, we would come to, now we may request, and this is not unusual for us to have happen. It's like, we may request proof or some documentation from your landlord, right? We often require, we do require non-disturbance and attornment agreements, meaning that there's a right to cure in the event that the applicant becomes delinquent on their payments to the landlord. So we don't want landlord foreclosing on the investment without giving an opportunity to cure. So there may be things that we would ask to be able to have proof of, but our agreement will be with the applicant. But I'm not saying it's impossible that we, you know, it is, I'm saying it is possible that we may need additional assurances or additional proof, which would involve some level of conversation with your third-party vendors or contractors, the landlords. But you know, we're not going to undermine your negotiations with them, but we may need to validate what you have asserted to us in your LOI or your application.
Understandable. It seems like some upfront education to these parties might not be familiar will be critical. And then my other question was sort of, we touched on this a little bit earlier on PPAs, but thinking about, you know, if you have a renewable facility, may or may not be in a rural area, but take your point that, you know, the customer needs to be in a rural area. If you're thinking about like a data center or another large corporate partner that's looking for a PPA, obviously they'll have a great, you know, ability to demonstrate the creditworthiness of the deal. But it seemed like I was just hoping you could provide any more clarity on, you know, the strength of community benefit plans are really important, but you know, how less competitive might a program like that be versus actual delivery of power to like individual ratepayers to households.
I mean, so you do, there's a couple of ways to establish who's the beneficiary of power. One is it's a very physical thing. I'm doing a microgrid, I'm going to deploy a solar array, I'm going to distribute that power to this discrete town or village or service territory. And you know, that's a physical demonstration. I'm the utility serving that town. Right? Or I can have a contractual agreement. I'm generating power and I'm selling that power to this rural collection of towns or rural population. And the non-utility PPAs, you could imagine, I don't know, a large, again, bankable corporation that has a rural presence, and they may want to be buying power for all of its rural locations. And that would be established with the PPA, and it'll tell us who the buyers of the power, in other words, who are the beneficiaries of that power. So, you know, in our core program, we often say, you know, you could put a power plant in Chicago as long as it served people in rural Illinois, that would be eligible. But a power plant in rural Illinois serving Chicago wouldn't be. We're looking at who benefits from the power itself.
Yeah, no, understood. I think I was getting more at sort of the, you know, strength of your beneficiary if you consider if you're going to prioritize, you know, individual ratepayers over a PPA to a corporate off-taker that will generate revenue and jobs, et cetera, in a rural area.
It will be a consideration, and again, some of that consideration is expressed in your community benefits plan, and just by the nature of your project. You know, I think Congress intended us to be able to serve rural people, but we know that there are opportunities to be able to serve rural industries.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Okay, we've still got a lot of hands up, so we're going to try to more rapid fire this. Okay, so I think Harris is next. All right.
Hey, thanks for, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great, thank you. In the service of time, I will try to do these as rapid fire as I can. I wrote them out to be sort of direct. So the first one I think is pretty straightforward. How's the USDA actually published guidance on ITC and PTC direct pay, or are you still working it out?
So we won't publish guidance necessarily on that. It will be the Treasury Department has put out their draft guidance for direct pay last week on the 15th. And I think that guidance makes it clear that you would look at the totality of the project. You wouldn't have to subtract the federal funding coming from other sources. And then you would calculate your ITC and PTC and direct pay based on that.
But that being said,
so
we're not able to
it's
speak
draft-
for the Department
yeah.
of Treasury, but we
It's,
will
yeah,
be taking their advice.
yeah, so their draft guidance is out, so I think that's probably the best thing they can give you guidance for now, and then we are looking to have them join us for a number of gatherings, hopefully over the next month or so, so you can hear from them directly as well.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And then related to the Buy America Classic and Build America, Buy America requirements. So if we were to apply as a tax exempt, would that fall under Buy America Classic or BABA? I think it's BABA based on what you explained, but I just wanted confirmation.
Tax exempt cooperative or tax exempt
It's a nonprofit.
nonprofit. Again, not speaking for the Buy America office, but that does sound to me as that would be BABA as opposed to Buy America Classic.
Okay, great. And then last question is related to loan forgiveness from a kind of just a purely financial modeling perspective, right? Do you guys have a view of how loan forgiveness will actually work? Is it like upfront loan forgiveness? And does that impact the amortization schedule? Or does it amortize over the same like 30-year tenor, let's say, but at a lower principal amount? Do you see where I'm going with that? I'm just trying to get my hands around how this would actually look.
Well, let me try to walk through it tonight. Let's take a simple million dollar case for a very simple solar project. And we will obligate $1 million of funding when we approve you, right? And let's say you're a project financer, so we will not be taking the construction risk. You'll have to secure an interim financer. You'll build the project. Once the project is built, operating, fully delivered, validated by our field staff, say, okay, they promised a solar project producing this much kilowatt of power, this reliable, this type. They've delivered it. Check. Great. All right. So since the project financing, we haven't advanced any money yet. But now at the end of the process, we will release the $1 million of funding to you. And then we will take, let's say, if you're in the 40% category, we'll do $400,000 and then use that to pay down your debt. You will then have to pay back the balance, the $400,000 to $600,000 remaining over the term of the loan. And that'll be amortized from that point forward.
Excellent. That is incredibly helpful. Thank you for that. And again, appreciate your time. These Q&A sessions are really, really helpful.
The only difference with system finance is we would consider advancing loan fund during construction. Unfortunately, we have a lien on all other assets as an operating utility.
Thank you. We'll do another hand, and then we do have one from the room. So after this next hand, we'll do a question from the room.
Ryan, go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Just really enjoy these sessions. Appreciate your time. We're a distribution co-op, Southern Colorado. We've got several projects planned for application, one under PACE and then some others under New Era. Solar storage, microgrid, associated line upgrades. We're also interested in a feasibility study around emerging generating technologies. Is that something that could be coupled in our LOI and considered for later submission?
No, that one unfortunately is a no, but that the place to shop for feasibility studies and demonstration projects would be Washington, D.C., our neighbor across the street on 12th Street, the Department of Energy. We're looking for proven technology and infrastructure investment. So feasibility study would not be eligible, but we're delighted that you're looking at other infrastructure related possibilities.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Ryan. Okay, one from the room.
Okay, under the 60% loan forgiveness, number 2 says this is under PACE. Proposed service area consists of 60% or more of a tribal area. Okay, that's the sentence. Co-op has 3 complete tribal reservations within its territory. So they serve 100% of 3 different reservations, but the total of those is less than 60% of their area. So would that apply for the
Less than
60%?
50% of the co-op area?
Right.
Service area?
Because it says 60% more of a tribal area, they serve 100% of the tribal area.
Yeah, so the thing here is about the service area of the project. Okay, so you would have to look at the whole service area of the project, and then 60% of that would have to serve tribal areas.
So if the project serves the whole co-op, then you, by your hypothetical, or your example, it doesn't meet the 60% test. If the project is dedicated to the 3 tribal areas, it might.
Yeah, then it would, absolutely.
Might meet that
Yeah.
category.
That was the question.
Okay.
Actually, one more since I've got the microphone. Co-op grew up around a big city. So it serves 17 counties. One county has 75% of its meters, something like that. It also serves 16 totally rural counties. Is there any way that that can be described as a rural?
Is
co-op?
that a current or former RUS or REA borrower?
I think so.
If you're a current or former RUS or REA borrower, you are your service territory is deemed to be rural for the purpose of your application.
Okay, I can answer their
And
question.
if I could ask my colleagues in Washington to put that section into the chat. So just to double check to make sure I spoke precisely.
Thank you.
Thank
You know, it's that kind of goes in membership has its privileges category. Current or former RUS borrowers are considered rural purposes.
Okay, great. Who else do we have with their hand up?
Daniel, go ahead. You're allowed to talk. Amisna, you're next, and then Felicia.
Great, thank you so much. And like everyone else here, just want to echo these FAQs are super helpful for all of us. I have a few questions specifically related to PPAs and New Era, specifically a situation where the cooperative would purchase the power from a project built by a private developer. First, after reading the FAQ that was just released regarding this, I have a question about the maximum PPA term that's would be eligible for funding under this. I see it's 20 years. Does that mean that the PPA that's signed between the developer and the co-op can only be 20 years max, or does that just mean the funding is based on a maximum length of 20 years?
The latter.
The latter.
We are willing to finance up to 20 years of the PPA. So your PPA could be 30 years if you want it, but we will offer financing for 20.
Okay, great. That makes a ton of sense. And then next,
Are you still with us, Daniel?
Somehow we lost Daniel.
Yep, we lost Daniel. Daniel, raise your hand again. We'll get that question. But right now we're gonna go to Misna and then Felicia, you're next. So Misna, go ahead, please.
Hi all, thank you so much for the time. My question is for the PACE loan program. The Federal Register states that applicants must disclose foreign project owners, and I'm wondering if there are any specific details or formats that are required for that, and also will projects with foreign co-owners have a lower likelihood of being chosen?
No, it's just we do have to vet foreign ownership, and we have a process of doing that. And that's true for all of our investments in RUS. So no, we just need to know, and then we will vet it. And if it passes
Yeah, if there's
the
something.
test, if there's nothing to worry about, then it doesn't affect your scoring. It doesn't affect your place in the queue. It doesn't affect your greenhouse gas score.
Yeah, or for PACE, yeah, it doesn't, yeah, they just
it's
have to,
right.
we just have to
It
know,
is
and
right.
they have to be upstanding entities.
Great, thank you so much.
We'll let thank you, Lisa. We'll let Daniel go ahead and finish off his question and then we'll move along. We're almost done, guys. Felicia and Paul, you're next.
Great, thanks so much, Scott. So yeah, going back to my next question, I saw in the FAQ and also in the slides earlier in the presentation today, that applicants can also include the cost of infrastructure related to the delivery and utilization of PPA purchased energy as part of the proposal. So if in your LOI, when you're submitting this, you would include, for example, the whatever funding amount you're asking for, whether it's loan or grant, it would be based off of the 20 years of the PPA. And then you could also include the cost of utility infrastructure upgrades, a percentage of that. Is that my understanding that correctly?
Right, if you need those upgrades to be able to receive that power.
And I guess that's where I'm wondering. So traditionally, what will happen is the co-op or the utility will have the private developer pay for those upgrades. Would that still apply in this situation?
Well, no, because the cooperative would be the one that's applying for the funds. So
right,
the cost that the cooperative has to incur in order to receive the clean power.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. And then lastly, if you're requesting a grant amount as the cooperative, is it possible that in that grant amount that you request in the application, could the ERA offer an award less than the requested amount, or do you get the requested amount or nothing?
Oh, no. We
could offer something less than the requested amount. Yeah, it won't be a binary.
Right.
It won't be binary.
No.
Okay.
We're going to want to look what the field looks like. You know, we want to be able to see how far the money can stretch. We have to be able to, so with New Era, it is a competition, and
if we have a lot of really, really great, applications and we use our discretion to try to stretch the funds, then we might come back with, a different offer.
That's why we said up to in each one of the categories.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you,
Yeah,
Daniel.
just because you ask for it doesn't mean you're going to get it, but be sure to ask for things that you need so that we can take it under consideration.
Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you.
Felicia, you may go ahead and speak to our panel.
Yes, hi there, and thank you so much for, just allowing this time to get our questions answered. Both of my questions were already answered. As a matter of fact, I wanted an example of the letter of intent for the New Era program. So I did see where that was attached. And then also I just had a quick question regarding the authentication ID for each of the staff members that will need access for the application once that is up and running. I wasn't sure if there was a deadline for us to go ahead and register for that, but it doesn't seem like there is.
There's no deadline for you to register. You do have to have it in order to apply. So I would go ahead and
Just get
your EOP identification as soon as possible.
Yeah, it'll come in handy.
And then for the New Era LOI, I don't think that actually is up yet. The PACE letter of interest sample is up. We haven't put that up for New Era yet, so that's coming. But in the funding announcement for New Era, there is a description of kind of what we'll be requesting.
And you'll see some similarities. One of the big differences between PACE and New Era is that we do have to receive the greenhouse gas data in order to put you into the greatest to least greenhouse gas queue.
And then let's take the next hand, and then Lisa just reminded us that we should look at the chat box as well. So we'll look at the chat box, but next hand. And thank you, Felicia.
Thank you.
All right, Paul, you want to talk to the panel, and then we have Carlos, Jessica, and Jonathan, if you want to just throw yours into the chat, keep your hand up just in case, but throw your questions in the chat so we make sure that we get that recorded, okay? Alicia. Paul, you can go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity to ask live. I offer a hydrogen-based energy storage product. I'm in conversations with both co-ops and tribal groups on projects. And so I want to make sure I understand exactly what is eligible and isn't eligible. So I'm assuming that as long as I'm connected to a new renewable project, energy storage is trying to create a 24/7 ability to deliver power, meaning that, you know, when the sun goes down, you have renewable power that you're stored and could put back into the system. That's eligible, I assume, right?
And to be clear, Paul, you're talking about PACE, correct?
PACE and or New Era.
And or New Era,
Yeah,
okay, very good.
Because I'm talking to co-ops too.
Yeah, for either of them, if the energy storage enables better use of that renewable energy, then that's great. And I don't think that it has to be, absolutely has to be new. For PACE, it absolutely does have to be new power generation. And then for New Era, if you are adding in energy storage to enable better usage of existing renewables, that's
But
also
if I might clear,
acceptable, yeah.
on PACE though, you can deploy energy storage in support of an existing renewable asset.
Okay, that's true,
Right,
yes.
but it's a
Good point.
new energy storage investment. And so we'll be able to finance that. So
As long as it's supporting
again,
renewables.
again, and Paul, I want to be clear too. You gave us a very brief description of the technology. So we've got to be just accepting the premise that technology described as a storage technology. So
That's commercially.
that's commercially viable, right?
Yes,
Commercially
yes,
viable. Because we
yes.
don't, we don't
Yeah,
take
as
technology
long-
risks
Yeah,
at
as long
RUS.
as it's commercially available, then that would qualify, and yeah, it just needs to support renewables.
So under PACE, you know, it could be renewable plus storage or storage alone in support of renewable. What is not acceptable in PACE would be storage in support of, let's say, non-renewable or fossil, right? Or carbon. So it's like renewable.
Make
in
sure I
support of
understand this correctly. An existing renewable project that adds storage, mean our product,
okay,
is eligible under PACE and New Era.
Yes. Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Because that would
Second-
be, right.
The second question is, we've got the ability to add a level 3 EV charger to our system wherever we locate the product. Is that an eligible use of funds under either PACE or New Era?
No.
No.
The charger itself would not be.
Yeah, unless the charger is used, no. No, it
But
wouldn't
we
be,
would-
but the REAP program, under the REAP program, that RBCS, the Rural Business, Agency does administer and is a program of the Rural Development Agency or Rural Development Mission, does allow for kind of renewable plus storage, and I think, charging station, but that's for small businesses.
And Claire, we wouldn't have a complete webinar if I didn't make an advertisement for the Rural Energy Savings Program.
Which is a great
Which is a
program.
fabulous program. Hundreds of millions of dollars available right now to lend to utilities at 0% interest rate to relend to your customers for energy efficiency measures. And those energy efficiency measures can include charging stations. So on-grid, off-grid renewable energy, HVAC improvements. Conditions are 0% to the utility lends it to their customer at no more than 5%. Customer pays back the utility through on-bill financing. Utility pays us back. We get our security from the utility. There is a great place for 0% investment to customer-owned charging stations. And then if the utility wants to own the charging station, our core program, we've had an effect of the Rural Electrification Act since 1937. We were able to, 1936, we're able to finance those charging stations if the utility wants to own them as part of their infrastructure. But unfortunately, or I guess the PACE program and the new ERA program don't have a charging station element to their.
Well, one door closed, another one opened. Thank you for your
Exactly right.
response.
Take a look at Rural Energy Savings Program. We love that program. We would love you to be able to apply for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And excited about energy storage. That's great. Okay, so let's go for the question. Okay, let's see what we've got. So I think actually a lot of the Q&A we may have answered already. Jake, I think we answered your question. Are infrastructure costs enabling PPAs eligible for grant funding? Yes, or debt. Let's see, I think I'm just trying to go through and see which ones we haven't answered. Let's see. Please qualify. Yeah, I think actually for folks that some of these really do need to be explained a little bit.
Yeah, the equipment lease
Yeah.
could be an issue. Will a combined offtake agreement and equipment lease qualify for what? So
Yeah,
Paul,
so
we want to make sure, Paul, if you want to come back and explain that to us, because that's a question with many answers depending on its context.
Well, if in a commercial situation, our equipment can be leased to the customer with an offtake agreement, in a sense that they are paying for the energy that's taken from storage, but they're also paying for the storage equipment through a lease program. And it's really a capital lease, and didn't know if that was something that falls into your financing guidelines.
Under PACE or New Era?
Either one.
So under PACE, I think you would need to, I think the answer is no.
I think we need to take that one back.
Yeah.
I have to, you complicated it for me, Paul, by saying it's a capital lease. So let me, we'll put this one into our future Q&A written responses. I think we need to dig a little deeper into that.
It's just, it's a financing thing that works on the commercial side. I didn't know how it worked on the co-op or tribal side.
Yeah. Okay, we'll come back to you on that one. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Carlos, you asked, does a proposed fossil fuel generation retirement need to occur before FY 2031 to be eligible for stranded debt refinancing? Yes. So you'll look at that calculator that we put out, and basically we'll calculate from the date that it becomes stranded. So say you're going to retire it in 2028 through the end of the debt on that stranded asset. And that number of years is what we can help refinance.
So if you're planning to retire a plant in 2032, you're outside of that window. So maybe you want to accelerate your thinking and get under the debt.
And John Buffington asked about the 20 years on the PPA. And so, yes, you can have a PPA longer, as we talked about, longer than 20 years, but we would only fund up to 20 years. That's what we base the amount on. Let's see, I think we answered actually a lot of these questions. Folks, let's go back to hands. And if you feel like you put a question in the chat, in the Q&A box that we haven't answered, if you could raise your hand and ask it, that would be great.
Jonathan, you may speak to our team here.
Hey there. I just wanted to make sure I understood what you said about the financial statements and having the financial wherewithal to pay back the loans earlier. I want to confirm that applies to the PACE program, where these are project finance projects. So until we construct the project and reach commercial operation, the project doesn't have the assets to pay back. So we need to have a financial backing upfront in the LOI to prove that we have that financial wherewithal. Is that correct?
I mean, in the context of PACE and in the context of a project finance, right, we're going to be financing the developer. The developer is at risk during construction. So if you don't get to operation, because we're not going to be financing you during construction. So we'll be the takeout financer. But
Right, that I understood. I just wanted to make
I
sure
mean,
the question
but
you answered.
because you're effective, even though we're kind of considering this on a rolling basis, if you grab the money, somebody else doesn't, and you don't really have the wherewithal to be able to do the project, that's taking the money from somebody away from somebody else who could. But we do need to be able to make some financial feasibility determinations on that.
Good.
See a really
Thank you.
good question.
Yeah, Shannon, you want me to read it
Yeah,
and then
why not?
answer it?
Okay.
So Shannon Beard, you asked for PACE. We're no longer a RUS borrower. We think we paid off our loan, prepaid our loans off in the 1980s with provision that we wouldn't take out any additional RUS loans. But this prohibited us from taking out a PACE loan, RUS loan, and therefore subsequent loan forgiveness.
It would not prohibit you from that.
Under PACE or New Era.
Under PACE or New Era, we
These
want
are
you, we want you
programs
back.
and
We want you
we're
back.
welcoming
Now
you
we
back.
will, subject to your current condition to, traditional underwriting, ability to repay, but bygones are bygones when it comes to PACE and New Era. Those provisions in the Rural Electrification Act related to discounted prepayment, what we call the cooling off periods. Number one, those are waivable by the secretary, but they don't actually apply. So they would not be an impediment to you participating in either one of these.
And Cynthia, if you're still on, I'd like to answer your question. You've asked, I have a project in Vermont. I'm wondering if it qualifies for PACE. It will take heat from an existing power generation plant and use it to use that heat to dry pellets and wood chips. Unfortunately, the PACE program is based on new power generation or battery or other kinds of storage. So it has to be power generation that you are using the funds for. So you couldn't use power from another entity and then use that for another purpose. So
because I think the hook here is to dry the pellets for wood chips, presumably to create a bio.
Yeah, but
fuel, but that's creating the biofuel that's not using the biofuel to generate energy.
Yeah.
We understand your question.
if it was a biomass project where you yourself are then using those dry pellets and wood chips towards a energy generation project, then that would be eligible for PACE. But if you're just using power from an existing source to create pellets and wood chips, that would not be. Let's see, what else do we have? Anybody with their hands up?
We got Carlos. You'll be able to talk, sir.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, go ahead, Carlos.
Hi, thank you for your time and the opportunity to ask these questions. I have a follow-up on the New Era program. Are acquisitions of completed and operating renewable and clean energy assets eligible for funding through New Era? Or is it the only avenue on a completed project, a PPA?
Oh, no, so let's go through the eligible purposes. In fact, maybe I could ask Tasha to bring up our core New Era slide. So when it comes to renewable power, you can, under the statute, you can purchase the power. That's what we've been talking about. And we've had a lot of discussion today about PPAs because we just, in this webinar, published for the first time our methodology on how we would finance PPAs. But you can be also, as an eligible purpose, is acquiring an existing renewable energy system, or acquiring a zero emission system, or constructing a clean energy system, as well as generation and transmission energy efficiency measures, which produce reductions in greenhouse gases. And also eligible on the table, which we didn't have any questions about today, but statutorily and in the funding notice, carbon capture sequestration technologies are an eligible purpose. So the key here to all of these eligible purposes though is that they have to be new, starting at no earlier than the date of enactment, which was August 16th, 2022, and then represent an addition, particularly a new era, to your baseline numbers, which we have set as the 2022.
A follow-up in that, basically, so if a solar farm, let's say, was built, it's been, in operation since 2021, we could still use New Era to acquire that, even though, construction happened before, the effective date.
Right. No, an acquisition, right. An acquisition is acceptable as long as it's new, it would be new to you.
Okay.
Now, we would value that asset in terms of its remaining useful life, right? We would, so if you're buying, kind of like you're buying a used car, it may not have the same useful life or value that it would if it were brand new. But no, an acquisition, if you don't own it already, you could acquire a renewable asset. Now, in New Era, remember, your strategy is to be able to generate greenhouse gas reduction. So make sure that it's something that's additive to your carbon profile.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you.
And we only have 2 hands left, so let's work through them. Dan
Yes.
Stevenson.
Hey, this, apologies if this is a redundant or this has already been covered, but so I'm looking back at the PPA slides for New Era, seeing up to 20 years using 3% discount rate for a net present value. So in a scenario where a 25% grant only is being requested to fund the construction of a solar project, or excuse me, to fund a co-op's purchase of energy through a PPA for a newly constructed solar project, that the amount of that grant, is this saying it's 25% of the PPA of the cost of the energy for the first 20 years of a 25? If the PPA was 25 years, we only look at 20 years worth of cost under the PPA and to discount those payments back at 3%, and it's 25% of that number, the present value.
Yep.
As opposed to 25% of the build cost for the project, for example.
Yeah.
If okay. All right.
We need in the PPA, we need to be able to have price, a quantity, and a term, and we will finance up to 20 years of that. If your quantity in your PPA is a range, we will use the minimum range as your quantity.
Right. Okay. All right. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. And Daniel, back to you.
Yeah, appreciate you getting back to me again. I have another question related to the grid upgrades or the distribution upgrades in regard to purchasing energy or making purchasing renewable energy possible. So I guess like delving a little bit more into that, trying to understand if, for example, the cooperative has to incur some cost for upgrading a substation to integrate that renewable resource into its system and make using that energy possible. Would that be eligible? That cost is eligible? But then I guess I'm having trouble with that is then the cooperative usually typically pass that cost off to the developer of the asset under a PPA structure.
Well, but if that cost is not incurred by the co-op and is passed on to the developer, presumably that is reflected in the price that the co-op is paying for the PPA. So, but if the co-op has to invest its own money into a piece of infrastructure, let's say it is the substation, in order to receive the clean energy, as well as and buy that clean energy, that could be bundled together as part of the co-op's expense. But if the co-op is not going to be paying that because it's the developer that's paying for that, well, then that doesn't count.
That doesn't count. Okay, no, that makes sense. I just
And
wanted
that would
to
be
clarify
paying, again, our principle here is you don't pay for the same thing twice. So if you're paying the developer is bearing those costs, and those costs are reflected in the developer's charge to the co-op, well then the co-op shouldn't be able to recover what the developer's already recovered.
Okay. No, great. Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
We are
Yeah.
closing in on the final minutes here. Do we have any?
I think Madeline, we can do, we've got just a
got
second
Madeline.
left. So Madeline, if you want to come back.
And we
on.
have, if we can try to special guest here, a colleague from the field, Shekinah Pepper from the telecom program, who is just an amazing individual. Those of you who have worked in the Reconnect program, we also have Patty Klein here, if you could see out there in the distance, our general field representative.
So if you.
Great state of Kansas and covering elsewhere.
So if you're calling in from Kansas, these are your
Yes.
key contacts for you guys.
We got the Jayhawks here in full force.
Madeline, over to you, and then we'll wrap.
Okay, thanks. Thanks all of you for this really helpful office hours. I think everybody really appreciates it. So for New Era, there's the scoring criteria that's based on greenhouse, et cetera. And then you mentioned 5 additional unscored items. So consumer benefits for affordability, project cost per unit of GHG reduction, geographic distribution, cost related to funding, and efficient use of program funds. Can you talk a little bit about broad strokes, how are you going to integrate those criteria, those unscored criteria into the selection process for the New Era program? And, could those kinds of elements sort of give, let's say, smaller projects a boost, even if they don't have the same level of absolute greenhouse gas reductions that like a larger project would have?
Yeah, so
I would just say, these are similar to how DOE and some of the other agencies do this. These are areas of discretion. We will document clearly how we're, when we use them in making any determinations or decisions. But these are kind of the areas that would, that reflect other priorities that we have for the program, that reflect administration priorities, et cetera. And so, we would just document them clearly. And in some cases, they might, geographic location in there, things like that. So they just reflect other values of the program that we'll be able to use some discretion.
a good way to think about this is you could have 2 projects score identically in the greenhouse gas calculation, but one is 10 times more expensive than the other. So as between those 2, who ranks ahead? One that is more affordable would rank ahead. Or you could have similar projects with the exact same score, but one says, I'm going to really invest in this community. I'm going to create lots of jobs. I'm going to make the environment clean. We're going to clean up this area. And then another one says, I'm just going to be giving you power, right? So which one would rank higher? So we're, it's part of where you are in the geographic diversity. You don't know exactly who's going to come in the door. It could be if all of the projects are like on one side of the country and nobody's on the other side of the country, somebody might be able to jump ahead of the line because they're, no one in that region is well represented. But one of the things we tried to do, particularly in the New Era competition, is to create 3 separate lanes so peers only compete against peers. So the under 200 million in that, in total utility plant would be one group, and then 200 to 500, and then 500 above.
We are going to have to wrap. Thank you everyone so much for joining today. We will have another one of these sessions, I think on the 29th, I believe. And again, just thank you everybody for engaging and for your time. We appreciate it.
We do appreciate it. Thank you very, very much. And remember, you can't win if you don't enter.
Thank you.
Thank you.